Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we journey to the ancient city of Cairo in the winter of 1934, where within the sacred walls of a Coptic convent, a renowned archaeologist is found dead in the cloister garden. Stay with me until the very end, for this mystery holds not one but two attempts at murder, and only the master detective can reveal which one succeeded. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoy these stories and the work I do here, please consider subscribing to the channel. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're listening from. I always feel joy reading your comments. Now, settle in with a hot cup of coffee. Stay curious and let's get started. A Killing in Cairo. Chapter 1. The Ancient City Calls. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, delivered to my lodgings in Whitehaven Mansions, with the precise handwriting I knew so well adorning the envelope. Even before I broke the seal, I recognized Poirot's characteristic script with its careful flourishes and mathematical precision. My dear Hastings, I write to you from the most fascinating of cities where the ancient and the modern exist in perpetual dialogue. Cairo in winter has proved most beneficial to my constitution. The bronchitis that plagued me so severely in London has quite vanished in this golden warmth. But it is not merely the climate that has restored my spirits. A case of the most intriguing nature has presented itself, one that I believe will appeal greatly to your sense of adventure and your appreciation for the complexities of human nature. I find myself in need of your steady companionship and your invaluable observations. Pray, if your circumstances permit, take the first available passage to Cairo. I am residing at the Pension de Rose in the Coptic quarter. Madame Habib, the proprietress, is most accommodating. Do bring your tropical clothing. The Egyptian sun, even in winter, demands respect. Within 48 hours, I found myself aboard the P&O steamer, bound for Alexandria. My hastily packed valise containing little more than tropical clothing, and a growing curiosity about what manner of mystery had drawn my old friend to the ancient land of the pharaohs. Cairo in winter proved a revelation. The harsh sun of summer had given way to a golden warmth that seemed to embrace rather than assault, and the city hummed with an energy quite different from the languorous heat I had expected. The air carried scents both familiar and exotic: coffee, spices, the dusty smell of ancient stones, and beneath it all, the indefinable essence of a civilization that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. I discovered Poirot installed in a modest pension in the old Coptic quarter, an establishment that bore the somewhat grandiose name of Pension de Rose. The building itself was a charming amalgamation of architectural influences: Mamluk stonework supporting Turkish balconies, all crowned with a decidedly European red-tiled roof. My friend occupied a corner room on the first floor, its windows offering a view across the narrow streets to where the ancient towers of Coptic churches rose like sentinels above the crowded rooftops. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot exclaimed as I was ushered into his presence by Madame Habib, the proprietress. "How good it is to see you. The sea voyage, it has agreed with you. I perceive you have the look of a man who has eaten well and slept soundly." Indeed, I found my friend in excellent spirits, though I noted with concern that his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of recent illness. His collar, while still precise, lacked its customary military stiffness, and there was a certain fragility about his movements that spoke of a constitution recently tested. I confess, Hastings, that the English winter was proving too much for Poirot, he admitted as we settled into chairs by the window. "The bronchitis, she is a most persistent enemy. But see how the Egyptian air has restored me. Already the little gray cells, they function with their accustomed clarity." The room itself reflected Poirot's personality, even in these temporary quarters. His few possessions were arranged with mathematical precision upon the simple furniture. His patent leather shoes stood at perfect attention beside the bed. His brushes were aligned with military exactness upon the washstand, and even his small collection of books had been arranged according to some system comprehensible only to their owner. "But you must tell me, Poirot," I said, settling back in. My chair with a cup of the excellent Turkish coffee Madame Habib had provided. "What manner of case has drawn you to Cairo?" Your letter was tantalizingly brief. Poirot's eyes brightened with the familiar gleam that indicated his professional interest had been thoroughly aroused. "It is a matter of the greatest delicacy, mon ami. I have been approached by the mother, superior of the convent of St. Catherine, an establishment of some antiquity and considerable reputation here in the Coptic quarter. The good sisters, they are most distressed by certain irregularities in their peaceful existence." He rose and moved to the window, gazing out over the maze of narrow streets and flat-roofed houses that stretched toward the Nile. "The convent," he continued, "is famous for her collection of ancient manuscripts, documents of great historical and religious significance. For the past year, a distinguished British archaeologist, Sir Julian Markham, has been most generous in funding the restoration of their library. His contributions have made possible the preservation of treasures that might otherwise have crumbled to dust." "A philanthropic endeavor, surely," I observed. "Where lies the difficulty?" "The question I asked myself, Poirot," he replied, turning back to me. "Sir Julian, he is a man of considerable reputation in archaeological circles. His work in the Valley of the Kings has brought him international recognition. Yet—" He paused, his green eyes thoughtful. "There are undercurrents, Hastings, tensions beneath the surface of this admirable charitable work." Through the open window came the sounds of Cairo afternoon life, the clip-clop of donkey hooves on cobblestones, the musical calls of street vendors, the distant muezzin's call floating across the ancient city. It struck me forcibly that we were in a place where the weight of history pressed close, where every stone might have witnessed dramas stretching back through countless generations. "The convent is most interesting," Poirot continued. "Built upon foundations that date to the earliest days of Christianity in Egypt, yet maintained with a precision that would do credit to a Swiss clockmaker. The Mother Superior, she is a woman of formidable intelligence and unwavering devotion to her calling. Yet when she speaks of Sir Julian, I detect a note of, shall we say, carefully controlled disapproval." The afternoon light slanted across the room, throwing geometric patterns upon the worn but clean carpet. Somewhere in the building below, a clock chimed the hour with a silvery voice that seemed to echo from centuries past. I sensed that my friend had only begun to reveal the complexities of the situation that awaited us. In this city, where ancient faiths and modern ambitions intersected, where sacred and secular interests often collided, it seemed inevitable that human nature would assert itself in ways both predictable and surprising. As the Egyptian twilight began to paint the sky in shades of amber and gold, I found myself eager to discover what mysteries lay hidden within the peaceful walls of St. Catherine's Convent. Chapter 2: Sacred Ground and Secular Disputes. The following morning found Poirot and myself making our way through the labyrinthine streets of the Coptic quarter, guided by the melodious chiming of church bells that seemed to drift from every direction. The convent of St. Catherine revealed itself gradually as we approached. First, the weathered limestone walls rising above the surrounding buildings. Then, the ancient wooden gates studded with iron. And finally, the peaceful courtyard beyond, where fountains played among carefully tended gardens. Observe, Hastings, Poirot murmured as we paused at the entrance, how the architecture itself speaks of centuries. See there, the lower stones bear the marks of Byzantine masons, while the upper courses show the influence of the Islamic period. Yet all has been harmonized into something uniquely Egyptian. The portress ushered us in, a small, elderly woman, whose weathered face bore the serene expression I had come to associate with those who have found their calling in religious life. She led us across the courtyard to a reception room where we were invited to wait. The chamber was simplicity itself: whitewashed walls, a few plain wooden chairs, and a single crucifix carved from dark wood. Yet there was something profoundly restful about the space, as if the very stones had absorbed decades of prayer and contemplation. Presently, we were joined by Mother Superior Agatha, and I confess that this formidable woman made an immediate impression upon me. Tall and erect, with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing, she possessed that quality of calm authority that marks natural leaders. Her habit was immaculate, her manner gracious yet reserved. "Madame Poirot," she said, inclining her head slightly, "I am grateful you have come, and this must be Captain Hastings, of whom you spoke." "Indeed, Reverend Mother," Poirot replied with his most courtly bow. "My friend has accompanied me from England. His observations have proved invaluable in previous cases." "You are both welcome in our house," she said, settling herself in the chair opposite us. "Perhaps you would care to see something of our community before we discuss the matters that concern us." The tour that followed provided a fascinating glimpse into the daily life of the convent. Mother Superior led us through the library, where ancient manuscripts lay carefully preserved between sheets of protective cloth. Sister Mary Magdalene, the elderly librarian, looked up from her work to greet us with a gentle smile that transformed her austere features. "Sister Mary has devoted 30 years to cataloging our collection," Mother Superior explained. "Her knowledge of Coptic texts is quite unparalleled." We visited the scriptorium, where two young nuns bent over their copying work with the focused attention of medieval illuminators. In the treasury, Sister Catherine, a practical-looking woman with capable hands and shrewd eyes, showed us account books that recorded the convent's careful management of its resources. I noted with interest how her gaze lingered on each artifact as she explained their history, as if mentally calculating their worth. "Our community is small but self-sufficient," Mother Superior explained as we walked through the herb garden. "We take pride in maintaining traditions that have sustained Christian life in Egypt for over 15 centuries. It was in the garden that I first noticed the young novice who would later prove so central to our story." Helena moved among the plants with the quiet grace of one accustomed to contemplative life, her dark eyes downcast as she tended to a patch of medicinal herbs. When Mother Superior called her over to be introduced, I observed that she possessed the kind of understated beauty that might easily be overlooked in more worldly surroundings: olive skin, delicate features, and an expression of such profound sadness that it stirred one's protective instincts immediately. "Sister Helena joined us 6 months ago," Mother Superior said. "She has shown remarkable devotion to our way of life." The girl murmured something inaudible and curtsied before returning quickly to her work. I noticed that Poirot's sharp eyes followed her retreat with particular interest, and that she glanced back at us with an expression I could not quite interpret. Our peaceful tour was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Julian Markham himself. I heard his voice before I saw him, a carrying baritone that seemed to fill every corner of the courtyard as he engaged in animated conversation with someone I could not yet see. "That will be our benefactor," Mother Superior said, though I detected a subtle tightening around her eyes. "Sir Julian has been most generous in his support of our library restoration." The man who approached us was everything I had expected from Poirot's description, and more. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that speaks of a lifetime accustomed to authority, Sir Julian Markham carried himself with the confidence of one whose word is rarely questioned. His clothing was expensive and well-tailored, yet bore the practical modifications of a man who spends considerable time in dusty excavations. "Mother Superior," he called out heartily, "I trust you have reconsidered my proposal about the eastern boundary. The preliminary surveys continue to show fascinating possibilities just beyond your wall." The change in Mother Superior's demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. Her spine stiffened slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried a coolness that had been absent moments before. "Sir Julian," she said, "we have visitors today. May I present Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings, who are interested in our manuscript collection?" Sir Julian's attention shifted to us with the automatic courtesy of a man accustomed to social gatherings. "Delighted to meet you both. Fascinating place, this convent. Some of the documents here are absolutely priceless, though I must say modern. Preservation techniques could enhance their longevity considerably. The methods that have preserved these manuscripts for centuries seem quite adequate," Mother Superior replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Oh, certainly, certainly," Sir Julian said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "But progress, you know, science, advances. We cannot simply rely on tradition when innovation might serve better." The tension in the air was palpable now, though Sir Julian seemed oblivious to it. I glanced at Poirot and saw that he was following this exchange with the focused attention of a cat watching a mouse hole. "Speaking of progress," Sir Julian continued, "I do hope you will reconsider my request about the excavation permits. The area just beyond your eastern boundary shows remarkable archaeological promise. My ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest structures dating to the earliest period of Christian settlement. Think of the historical significance we might uncover. And think of what we might destroy in the process," Mother Superior replied quietly. "That ground has been consecrated for over 1,000 years, Sir Julian. Our sisters rest there, in peace. It is hallowed earth, not merely an archaeological site." The archaeologist's jovial expression flickered momentarily. "My dear Mother Superior, I hardly think a few careful excavations would disturb the eternal rest of—" "The answer remains no," she said with quiet finality. "Some things transcend scholarly curiosity." An uncomfortable silence fell over our small group. I found myself studying the faces around me, Sir Julian's barely concealed irritation, Mother Superior's quiet determination, and in the background, young Helena, who had moved closer during the conversation and now stood frozen among the herb. Beds, her face pale as limestone, and her dark eyes fixed upon Sir Julian with an intensity that was almost frightening in its concentration. The tension was broken by the gentle chiming of a bell, calling the community to their afternoon prayers. As the nuns began to file past us toward the chapel, I noticed that several cast troubled glances in our direction, while Sister Catherine lingered for a moment, her shrewd eyes moving from Sir Julian to Mother Superior with calculating assessment. The afternoon shadows were lengthening across the ancient stones, and somewhere in the distance, the eternal murmur of Cairo streets continued its age-old rhythm. Yet within these peaceful walls, I sensed currents of conflict that ran deeper than mere disagreements about archaeological permits. As we prepared to take our leave, promising to return for evening vespers, I found myself wondering what secrets lay buried beneath the carefully maintained surface of this holy sanctuary. Chapter 3. Vespers and Venom. Evening settled over Cairo with the swift certainty of tropical twilight, painting the ancient stones of the convent in shades of amber and gold. Poirot and I had accepted Mother Superior's invitation to attend Vespers, that most sacred of the day's offices, when the community gathered to offer their final prayers. Before the embrace of night. The chapel of St. Catherine was a masterpiece of understated beauty. Byzantine arches soared overhead, their curves softened by centuries of candlelight and incense. Icons gazed down from the walls with expressions of eternal compassion, their gold leaf catching and reflecting the flickering flames of dozens of votive candles. The air itself seemed thick with devotion, heavy with the accumulated prayers of countless souls who had sought solace within these walls. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, as we took our places in the visitors' section. "How the very architecture encourages contemplation. See how the eye is drawn upward, away from earthly concerns, toward higher considerations." The community filed in with silent precision, their habits rustling softly against the worn stone floors. I counted perhaps 20 nuns in total, ranging from elderly Sister Mary Magdalene, who moved with the careful dignity of advanced years, to several young novices who had not yet taken their final vows. Among these latter, I noticed Helena, her pale face almost luminous in the gentle candlelight, and Sister Catherine, whose practical demeanor remained unchanged even in this sacred setting. The service itself was conducted in the ancient Coptic language, its unfamiliar cadences adding to the sense of mystery and timeless ritual. Mother Superior led the responses with a voice that carried clearly through the vaulted space, while the community replied in harmonious unison. Even without understanding the words, I found myself moved by the evident sincerity of their devotions. It was during the preparation for the ritual communion that I first became aware of the central prop in the tragedy that was to unfold. The silver chalice was a thing of extraordinary beauty, Byzantine workmanship if I judged correctly, with intricate engravings that told the story of Christ's passion in miniature tableaux around its circumference. Sister Catherine approached from a side chapel, carrying it with reverent care to place upon a small table draped with white linen near the altar. "A most beautiful piece," Sir Julian whispered to me, having taken a seat nearby. "4th century, I should estimate. The craftsmanship is quite remarkable. Such pieces are beyond price." I noticed that several of the nuns glanced disapprovingly at his commentary during the sacred service, but Sir Julian seemed unconscious of their reaction. His attention was fixed upon the chalice with the professional interest of one accustomed to evaluating ancient artifacts. As the service progressed, my attention was drawn to the ritual use of incense. Helena had been assigned this duty, and I watched with growing fascination as she moved through the chapel with measured steps, swinging the ornate censer in precise arcs that sent fragrant clouds drifting upward toward the vaulted ceiling. The patterns created by the smoke were almost hypnotic, weaving intricate spirals in the still air of the chapel. Yet something about her manner troubled me. Her usual composure seemed strained, and I observed that her hands trembled slightly as she guided the censer through its prescribed motions. When she passed near Sir Julian, the smoke seemed to waver in its steady pattern, creating momentary eddies that drew my eye. From my position, I noticed that Sister Catherine, stationed near the altar, had an excellent view of the entire incense ceremony through a small window that connected the chapel to the sacristy beyond. Poirot, I saw, had noted this as well. His green eyes followed Helena's progress with the focused attention that indicated his professional interest had been aroused. When she completed her circuit and returned the censer to its place near the altar, he leaned closer to me. "Most interesting, the patterns made by the incense smoke," he murmured. air currents in enclosed spaces, they tell their own story to those who observe with care. Notice how the smoke moves differently when disturbed by sudden movement. As the service neared its conclusion, Sir Julian was invited forward, as the convent's honored benefactor, to share in the communion wine. The invitation was extended with perfect courtesy by Mother Superior, though I detected a certain stiffness in her manner that suggested the gesture was more duty than pleasure. The archaeologist approached the altar with evident satisfaction, clearly pleased by this acknowledgement of his importance to the community. The silver chalice was raised, blessed, and offered first to him before being passed among the sisters. I watched as he drank deeply, then returned the vessel with a slight bow before retiring to his seat. The wine itself appeared to be of excellent quality, a deep red that caught the candlelight like liquid rubies. Observe that Helena's eyes never left the chalice during this portion of the service, her face bearing an expression of such intense concentration that it seemed almost inappropriate for the solemnity of the moment. The service concluded with a final hymn, the Latin words rising and falling in harmonious waves that seemed to linger in the air long after the last note had died away. As the community began to file out in their customary silence, I felt that profound sense of peace that comes from witnessing genuine devotion. Sir Julian lingered after the service, engaging Mother Superior in conversation about some detail of the library renovation. Most of the community had dispersed to their evening duties, but I noticed that Helena remained in the chapel, apparently engaged in private prayer before one of the side altars. Her dark head was bowed, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles showed white in the candlelight. Sister Catherine moved efficiently about her duties, securing the sacred vessels and preparing the chapel for the night. I observed her careful handling of the silver chalice, noting how she cleaned it thoroughly with blessed water before carrying it toward the sacristy. Her movements were practiced and methodical, speaking of long familiarity with these evening rituals. A most moving service, I remarked to Poirot as we prepared to take our leave. Indeed, mon ami, he replied thoughtfully, though I confess that my attention was drawn as much to the participants as to the ritual itself. Human nature. She reveals herself in the most unexpected moments, particularly when souls believe themselves unobserved. We bid farewell to Mother Superior and made our way back through the darkened streets to our pension. The evening air was soft and warm, filled with the distinctive sounds of Cairo after dark, distant music, the clip-clop of late donkey carts, the murmur of conversations from darkened doorways. Yet, as we walked, I found myself thinking of the scene we had just witnessed, particularly of Helena's trembling hands and the strange patterns traced by the incense smoke. Little did I realize that within the hour the peaceful sanctuary we had just left would be transformed into a scene of horror, and that the silver chalice, which had seemed so beautiful in the candlelight, would become forever associated with death and deception. Chapter 4. Death in the Garden. The urgent hammering upon our door came at precisely 11h, shattering the peaceful silence that had settled over the Pension de Rose. I started from my chair, where I had been reading by lamplight, and saw Poirot emerge from his bedroom, his hair uncharacteristically disheveled, but his eyes immediately alert. "Mon ami," he muttered, reaching for his dressing gown. "Such urgency at this hour can mean only one thing." The messenger proved to be a young Coptic priest, his robes hastily thrown over what appeared to be night clothes, his face pale with distress. His English was heavily accented but comprehensible. "Please, you must come quickly," he gasped. "The convent. There has been a terrible tragedy. Mother Superior, she sends for Monsieur Poirot with greatest urgency. We dressed with all possible speed and followed our guide through the narrow moonlit streets. The contrast between the peaceful evening we had experienced earlier and this midnight summons was stark and unsettling. As we approached the convent, I could see lights blazing from windows that should have been dark at this hour, and the sound of agitated voices drifted over the ancient walls. The gates stood open, an unprecedented breach of the convent's strict routine. In the courtyard, several Egyptian policemen moved about with the somewhat aimless activity of men, confronted by circumstances beyond their usual experience. Their leader, a thin, nervous individual who introduced himself as Inspector Mahmoud, greeted us with obvious relief. "Monsieur Poirot, Alhamdulillah, thank God you're here. This is most terrible business, most irregular. We have never before had such trouble in the religious quarter." "What exactly has occurred?" Poirot inquired, his voice crisp despite the lateness of the hour. "Murder, monsieur. The English archaeologist, Sir Julian Markham. He's dead. Poisoned, we believe. Found in the cloister garden perhaps an hour ago." Mother Superior approached us from the direction of the chapel. Her usual composure was maintained despite the obvious strain of the circumstances. In the lamplight, her face appeared drawn and older than I had remembered from our afternoon visit. "Monsieur Poirot," she said simply, "I am grateful you have come. This is a tragedy beyond our understanding. Tell me, Reverend Mother, exactly what has transpired." After Vespers, Sir Julian remained to discuss some details of the manuscript cataloging with Sister Catherine and myself. We concluded our business around 10 al-Shai, and I personally escorted him to the garden gate, as is our custom with evening visitors. He mentioned his intention to take a brief walk in our cloister garden before departing. He had often admired our herb beds and said the evening air helped clear his thoughts after the day's work. She paused, her hands clasped tightly before her. At 11 precisely, Sister Catherine went to secure the chapel after completing her final duties. It was she who discovered the body. Inspector Mahmoud gestured toward the garden. "If you would examine the scene, monsieur, we have disturbed nothing, as you requested in previous cases." The cloister garden presented a scene both beautiful and terrible. Moonlight filtered through the arched walkway, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow across the carefully tended beds. The fountain at the center continued its gentle murmur, seemingly oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded nearby. Sir Julian lay beside one of the herb beds, his distinguished features contorted, in the unmistakable rictus of an agonizing death. His evening clothes were disheveled, his hands clawed, as if he had fought against some invisible enemy. Beside him, glinting in the lamplight, lay the silver chalice we had seen blessed and used during Vespers only hours before. "Most curious," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the body with careful attention to avoid disturbing the scene. "Observe, Hastings, the position of the chalice. It has fallen at a precise angle, suggesting it was dropped from his hand as he collapsed." I examined the vessel more closely. A small amount of dark liquid remained in its bottom, and even from a distance I could detect an acrid smell that cut through the lingering sweetness of the evening's incense. "The communion wine?" I asked. "So it would appear," Poirot replied. "Yet notice how the staining patterns suggest it was not simply wine that our unfortunate Sir Julian consumed." Inspector Mahmoud shifted nervously. "The Mother Superior, she is naturally our first concern for questioning. The quarrel this afternoon, it was witnessed by several persons, most unfortunate, but we must follow the evidence." I saw Mother Superior stiffen at his words, though her expression remained controlled. "I understand your position, Inspector. I will submit to whatever questions you deem necessary. But first, Poirot interjected smoothly, perhaps we might examine the scene more thoroughly. The secrets of a crime, they often lie in details that escape casual observation. What followed was a masterful demonstration of Poirot's method. He moved through the garden with the systematic precision of a surgeon, noting the placement of every stone, the direction of every footprint in the soft earth, the way the evening dew had settled on various surfaces. I watched him examine the fountain, the herb beds, even the ancient stonework of the cloister walls. "Most interesting," he murmured, crouching beside a patch of disturbed earth near where the body had been found. "See here, Hastings, the pattern of the soil disturbance, and here, upon this stone, the faintest trace of some substance that does not belong." As he worked, I became aware of the community gathering in the shadows of the walkway. The nuns stood in silent clusters, their white habits ghostly in the moonlight. Most appeared genuinely shocked and grieved, but I noticed that Helena seemed on the verge of collapse. She swayed slightly as she stood, and when Inspector Mahmoud addressed a question to the group, she gave a small cry and crumpled to the stone floor in a dead faint. Two of her sisters immediately moved to assist her, and she was carried away to the infirmary. I observed that Poirot noted this incident with particular interest, his green eyes following the small procession until it disappeared from view. "The shock," Mother Superior explained quietly. "Sister Helena is sensitive by nature. Such violence in our peaceful sanctuary is difficult for any of us to comprehend, but particularly hard for one so young in religious life." Indeed, Poirot agreed. "Yet tell me, Reverend Mother, during the Vespers service this evening, who was responsible for the incense ceremony?" "Sister Helena, as I believe you observed. It is one of the duties we assign to our novices as part of their spiritual development," Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And after the service concluded, the chalice that was used, how was it secured?" "Sister Catherine returned it to the sacristy, as is our usual practice. All our sacred vessels are carefully maintained and accounted for. Yet this same chalice was found with our unfortunate victim. Most curious, is it not?" The implications of his questions sent a chill through the assembled community. I saw several of the nuns exchange troubled glances, while Inspector Mahmoud made careful notes in his official book. Sister Catherine approached from the direction of the chapel, her practical demeanor intact despite the circumstances. "Inspector," she said, "I have secured the chapel and checked all our sacred vessels. Everything else remains in its proper place." "Including access to the sacristy?" Poirot inquired. "The door was locked after I completed my evening duties, and I retained the only key," she replied, producing it from beneath her scapular. "Though I confess, the discovery of Sir Julian's body has so disturbed me that I cannot recall every detail of my routine with perfect clarity. As the night wore on, and the initial examination was completed, it became increasingly clear that we were dealing with a crime of considerable complexity. The peaceful sanctuary that had seemed so removed from the world's troubles had become the stage for a drama as old as human nature itself. The eternal conflict between justice and vengeance, faith and betrayal, mercy and retribution. In the growing light of dawn, the ancient stones seemed to whisper of secrets that would challenge even Poirot's remarkable powers of deduction. Chapter 5. Secrets Behind Sacred Walls. The following morning brought with it the harsh light of Egyptian sun and the equally harsh reality of police investigation within the sacred confines of St. Catherine's. Inspector Mahmoud had established a temporary headquarters in the convent's reception room, transforming the peaceful chamber into a bustling center of official inquiry that seemed to violate the very spirit of the place. Poirot and I arrived early, finding the inspector reviewing a collection of documents spread across the simple wooden table like pieces of an incomplete puzzle. His expression suggested a man confronting complexities far beyond his usual experience of straightforward Cairo crime. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he greeted us with evident relief. "Perhaps you can make sense of what we have discovered. This Sir Julian, he was not perhaps the simple benefactor he appeared to be." The papers before us told a fascinating story. Among Sir Julian's effects, the police had discovered correspondence that revealed the archaeologist's true character in unflattering detail. Letters from the British Embassy spoke of complaints from local workers about unpaid wages. Communications with various Cairo merchants revealed a pattern of disputed bills and broken promises. Most disturbingly, there were several letters from Egyptian families seeking information about daughters who had disappeared after entering Sir Julian's employment as domestic servants. "A man of questionable character, it would seem," Poirot observed, examining a particularly damning letter from a local imam. "Tell me, Inspector, what have you learned of his domestic arrangements?" "Most irregular, monsieur. He maintained a house in the European quarter, but our inquiries suggest he spent considerable time in the native quarters of the city. There are stories of young women, promises made and broken, families left in poverty and shame." As we studied these revelations, Sister Mary Magdalene appeared at the doorway, her aged face bearing an expression of considerable distress. At Inspector Mahmoud's invitation, she entered and settled herself carefully in the chair opposite us. "I find I cannot remain silent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The weight of knowledge has become unbearable in light of this tragedy." Poirot leaned forward with gentle attention. "Please, sister, speak freely. Truth, however painful, serves justice better than silence." The elderly nun's hands trembled slightly as she began her story. Several years ago, there was a young woman named Fatima who worked as a seamstress for several European families in Cairo. She was known to our community. Her mother had been one of our lay sisters before her marriage. Fatima was a girl of exceptional beauty and gentle nature, perhaps 19 years old when she first encountered Sir Julian. He was working then with Professor Whitfield on the excavations near Saqqara. Fatima had found employment in the professor's household, and it was there that Sir Julian pursued her with promises of marriage, of a life in England, of security for her and her impoverished family. Inspector Mahmoud made careful notes as Sister Mary Magdalene continued her painful revelation. The inevitable occurred. Fatima found herself with child, abandoned by Sir Julian, who had suddenly discovered urgent archaeological business in the Sudan. Her family disowned her in their shame and anger. She came to us seeking sanctuary, but we could not accommodate her situation at that time. Our rules were more rigid, less compassionate. The story that unfolded was one of tragic consequence. Fatima had struggled alone in Cairo's poorest quarter, working when she could find employment, facing increasing poverty and social ostracism. She had given birth to a daughter, but both mother and child had lived in desperate circumstances, dependent on the charity of strangers and the occasional kindness of more fortunate women. Fatima died 3 years ago, Sister Mary Magdalene concluded, tears now flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. Consumption, brought on by years of hardship and malnutrition. Her daughter, the child, simply vanished after the funeral. Some said she had found work in one of the European households. Others believed she had left Cairo entirely, perhaps seeking relatives in the countryside. Poirot's expression had grown increasingly grave during this recitation. "This daughter," he asked quietly. What was her name? Helena, Sister Mary Magdalene whispered. Her name was Helena. The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Inspector Mahmoud looked up from his notes with dawning comprehension, while I felt the pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in my mind. When did Sister Helena join your community? Poirot inquired with careful precision. 6 months ago, came the reply. She appeared at our gates one evening in November, claiming to have been called to religious life. She had no family connections, no letters of recommendation from other religious houses. Yet something about her devotion seemed genuine. Mother, superior in her compassion, accepted her as a postulant. We learned that Helena had adapted quickly to convent life, showing particular aptitude for the duties involving the sacred vessels and ceremonies. Her knowledge of ancient rituals seemed unusually sophisticated for one so young, and she had requested specifically to be trained in the handling of the precious manuscripts and artifacts that Sir Julian's donations had helped preserve. She asked many questions about our benefactors, Sister Mary Magdalene admitted reluctantly, particularly about Sir Julian and his archaeological work. She seemed fascinated by the stories of his discoveries, his reputation, his connections with the European community in Cairo. At the time, we thought it merely the natural curiosity of an intelligent young woman. But now, the interview was interrupted by the arrival of Sister Catherine, who had been conducting her own investigation of the convent's security arrangements. Her usually composed demeanor showed signs of considerable strain, and she carried with her a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. Inspector, she announced, I have discovered something that may be significant, hidden among Sister Helena's possessions in the novice dormitory. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small glass vial, empty, but bearing the faint residue of some unknown substance. More disturbing still was a collection of newspaper clippings, all relating to Sir Julian's archaeological work, his various honors and appointments, and his movements between Cairo, London, and various excavation sites. They had been carefully preserved and arranged in chronological order, suggesting a long-term interest that went far beyond casual curiosity. Where is Sister Helena now? Poirot asked with increased urgency. Still in the infirmary, Sister Catherine replied. She has been deeply affected by last night's tragedy. The physician says she suffers from nervous exhaustion and shock. As we absorbed these new revelations, I found myself thinking of the young woman I had observed during Vespers, her trembling hands as she guided the censer, her pale face in the candlelight, her peculiar reaction to Sir Julian's presence during our afternoon visit. What I had interpreted as religious devotion and natural sensitivity now took on far more sinister implications. Yet something in Poirot's manner suggested that he was not entirely satisfied with the direction of the investigation. While Inspector Mahmoud appeared ready to arrest Helena based on the evidence before us, my friend maintained the thoughtful reserve that I had learned to associate with his most complex cases. The morning concluded with arrangements being made for a formal interview with Helena once the physician declared her fit to respond to questions. As we prepared to leave the convent, I noticed Mother Superior standing in the cloister garden, gazing at the spot where Sir Julian had met his end. Her expression combined grief, bewilderment, and perhaps something else, a quality I could not quite identify, but which seemed to speak of knowledge withheld rather than innocence betrayed. Chapter 6. The Pattern of Deception. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cloister garden as Poirot conducted what he termed his practical experiments. Inspector Mahmoud watched with barely concealed skepticism as my friend arranged and rearranged various objects upon the stone bench where Sir Julian had presumably sat before his final agonizing moments. You must understand, Hastings, Poirot explained as he carefully positioned a paper cup at different angles, that the mechanics of this crime are as important as the motive. A poisoner must not only possess the means and opportunity, but must also understand precisely how to deliver death without detection. He had procured from the convent kitchen a simple vessel similar in size to the silver chalice, and filled it with harmless red wine. Now he demonstrated various scenarios, showing how the cup might have been tampered with when poison could have been introduced and how the victim's movements might have been predicted. Consider the timing, mon ami. Sir Julian partakes of the communion wine during Vespers at 8 Assize, yet he shows no immediate symptoms. He conducts business with Mother Superior and Sister Catherine for nearly 2 hours after the service. Only when he ventures into the garden alone does death finally claim him. Suggesting a delayed action poison, I ventured. Precisely. Yet such substances are not easily obtained, especially by one living within convent walls. This suggests either considerable planning or access to specialized knowledge. Inspector Mahmoud shifted impatiently. With respect, Monsieur Poirot, we have discovered the vial among the novice's possessions. Combined with her obvious connection to the victim, surely the case is clear enough. Clear, perhaps, Poirot replied mildly, but not necessarily accurate. Observe, if you please, the exact position where the chalice was discovered. He guided us to the precise spot, marked now only by a few crushed herbs and the inevitable disturbance left by the police investigation. Kneeling beside the herb bed, he indicated several details that had escaped my earlier notice. See here. The pattern of the spilled wine. Note how it has splashed against this particular plant. And here, the impression left by Sir Julian's body as he fell. Most instructive, but perhaps not in the way we initially supposed. What followed was a masterful demonstration of Poirot's methods. Using his paper cup and harmless wine, he recreated various scenarios for the final moments of Sir Julian's life. Sometimes the cup fell cleanly. Other times it rolled beneath the nearby bench. The patterns of spillage varied considerably depending upon the exact circumstances of the victim's collapse. The poison, Poirot mused, worked swiftly once activated, yet our victim had time to set down the chalice with some care before succumbing. This suggests either great self-control or that he initially believed himself to be suffering from some minor ailment rather than mortal danger. As we conducted these experiments, I became aware that we were being observed. From the arched walkway that surrounded the garden, figures in religious habits appeared and disappeared like cautious spirits. The entire community seemed poised on the edge of nervous collapse, their peaceful routine shattered by the intrusion of violent death into their sanctuary. Most notably, I observed Mother Superior herself watching from the chapel entrance. Her attention seemed divided between our activities and something else. Following her gaze, I realized she was studying Sister Catherine, who moved efficiently about her afternoon duties, but paused frequently to glance in our direction with an expression of keen interest. Helena had emerged from the infirmary and now sat on a stone bench near the fountain, ostensibly reading her breviary. The young novice appeared wan and fragile in the afternoon light, her dark hair now completely concealed by her white veil. Yet there was something in her posture, her attention, that spoke of watchfulness rather than peaceful contemplation. "Tell me, Inspector," Poirot said suddenly, "what did your medical examiner determine about the exact nature of the poison used?" "The preliminary examination suggests strychnine, though the full analysis awaits completion at the government laboratory. A most unpleasant death. The victim would have suffered considerable convulsions and pain." "Intriguing," Poirot said. "Strychnine is not subtle in its effects. the victim would have been immediately aware that something was terribly wrong. Yet Sir Julian appears to have had sufficient time to walk from the chapel to the garden, conduct his business with Mother Superior, and begin his evening stroll before the poison took full effect. This observation troubled me considerably. But surely Poirot, if he had consumed poison during the communion service, the symptoms would have manifested much sooner. One would think so, yes. He paused, his green eyes suddenly bright with possibility, unless the poison was not administered during the service at all. But when else? Inspector Mahmoud asked. The chalice was used only during vespers, then returned to the sacristy according to established routine. Was it indeed? Poirot asked softly. Or do we perhaps assume too much based on appearances and established patterns? He rose from his examination of the ground and brushed the dust from his immaculate trousers. Come, gentlemen, I believe it is time we conducted a thorough examination of the sacristy and the procedures followed for securing the sacred vessels. What we discovered in the small chamber behind the chapel altar proved most illuminating. Sister Catherine, summoned to guide us, explained the careful rituals followed each evening after services. The chalice was rinsed with blessed water, dried with consecrated linen, and placed within a locked cabinet that held the convent's most precious artifacts. The key, she explained, producing it from beneath her scapular, remains always in my possession. I am responsible for the security of all our sacred vessels. Yet, as Poirot examined the cabinet with his characteristic thoroughness, I noticed something that had escaped my earlier attention. The small window that provided the sacristies only. Natural light commanded an excellent view of the chapel altar and the area where the communion vessels were prepared and used during services. Sister Catherine, Poirot said carefully, on the evening in question, did you follow your usual procedures exactly? Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I would never vary from the established routine in such matters. And after securing the chalice, you went immediately to your evening duties? Well, she hesitated slightly. I did remain briefly to complete some inventory work for our records. Perhaps 15 or 20 minutes, no more. The manuscripts donated by Sir Julian require careful cataloging. During which time you remained here in the sacristy? Yes, working at this very table. The window provides adequate light for such tasks, even in the evening hours. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. But I detected something in his expression that suggested new avenues of inquiry were opening before him. As we prepared to leave the sacristy, he paused to examine the view from the window more carefully, noting the precise angles and sightlines it provided. Our afternoon's investigations concluded with Poirot requesting permission to interview Helena, though Inspector Mahmoud insisted on being present during any such conversation. As arrangements were made for this crucial encounter, I found myself studying the young novice from a distance, trying to reconcile the image of a grief-stricken, religious postulant with that of a calculating murderer seeking revenge for her mother's abandonment and disgrace. The shadows were lengthening across the ancient stones, and somewhere in the distance, the eternal rhythm of Cairo's evening prayers began to drift across the city. Within these peaceful walls, however, the search for truth continued, guided by Poirot's relentless logic and his profound understanding of the human heart's capacity for both love and hatred, forgiveness and vengeance. Chapter 7. The Weight of Truth. The interview with Helena took place in the convent's small parlor. As the evening shadows lengthened across the ancient stones, she entered quietly, her movements careful and measured, accompanied by Mother Superior, who had insisted upon being present during the questioning. The young woman's appearance struck me forcibly. She seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of suspicion had physically diminished her presence within the room. Please, Sister Helena, Inspector Mahmoud began with uncharacteristic gentleness. We understand this is difficult for you, but we must ask certain questions about the events of yesterday evening. She nodded silently, her dark eyes fixed upon her clasped hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible above the distant sound of evening prayers beginning in the chapel. I will answer as best I can, Inspector, though I confess the events seem like a terrible dream from which I cannot awaken. Poirot, who had been studying her with his characteristic intensity, leaned forward slightly. Sister Helena, how long had you known of Sir Julian's identity before his death? The question struck like a physical blow. Helena's composure cracked visibly. Her hands trembled as she raised them to cover her face. For several long moments, the only sound was her labored breathing as she struggled to regain control. I don't understand what you mean, she whispered finally. I think perhaps you do, Poirot, he said gently. Your mother was Fatima, was she not? The seamstress who worked for European families, the woman who bore Sir Julian's child and was abandoned to face disgrace and poverty alone. Mother Superior drew in a sharp breath, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. Dear God, she murmured. Helena, is this true? The young woman's defenses crumbled entirely. Tears flowed freely now as she nodded, her voice breaking as she began to speak. She died in my arms, Mother Superior, in a squalid room with barely enough food to sustain us both. Her last words were about forgiveness, about how hatred would only poison my own soul. But I couldn't let it go. The story that emerged was one of calculated patience and long-nurtured vengeance. Helena had spent months learning about the convent and its routines before presenting herself as a postulant seeking sanctuary. Her knowledge of religious practices, which had so impressed the community, had been carefully acquired through observation and study. I knew he was a benefactor here, she continued, her voice gaining strength as the terrible burden of secrecy was lifted. I thought, if I could get close to him, find the right moment, I could make him pay for what he had done to her. Inspector. Mahmoud made careful notes, though I observed that Poirot seemed more interested in the psychological aspects of her confession than in the mere mechanics of guilt. His next question surprised me considerably. Yet something troubles me about your account, Sister Helena. The poison, strychnine, is not easily obtained, particularly by one living within convent walls. Where did you acquire such a substance? Helena looked genuinely puzzled by the question. I don't know what you mean. I never obtained any poison. The vial found among your possessions. What did it contain? Powdered glass, she whispered. From a broken lamp chimney in the servants' quarters where my mother died. I kept it. I kept it as a reminder of what he had done to us. I thought, if I could introduce it into his drink during communion, it might cause him pain, make him suffer as she had suffered. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Powdered glass. But Sister Helena, Sir Julian died of strychnine poisoning, not from glass fragments. The symptoms are quite different, and the medical examination was quite conclusive on this point. A profound silence fell over the room. Helena stared at Poirot with growing confusion, while Inspector Mahmoud looked up from his notes with obvious perplexity. Mother Superior's face had gone very pale, and I noticed her hands gripping the arms of her chair with considerable force. But that's impossible, Helena said finally. I prepared the powder so carefully. I waited for the right moment during the incense ceremony to approach the chalice when no one was looking. Ah, Poirot said softly. The incense ceremony? Yes. I observed your movements quite carefully during Vespers. Most interesting, the patterns made by the smoke as it swirled around you. Tell me, at what precise moment did you add your powdered glass to the chalice? Helena's brow furrowed as she recalled the events. Just after I had completed the circuit of the chapel with the censer, I paused near the altar, ostensibly to offer private prayer and use that moment to lean over the chalice. But the incense, the smoke, was behaving strangely. Instead of concealing my actions as I had hoped, it seemed to draw attention to what I was doing. Indeed it did, Poirot agreed. Air currents in enclosed spaces follow predictable patterns, and your movements disturb those patterns in ways that observant eyes might notice. But here we encounter our central problem, Sister Helena. If you added only powdered glass to the chalice, how did Sir Julian come to die of strychnine poisoning? The implications of this question seemed to dawn on everyone simultaneously. Helena's attempted murder had failed before it had even properly begun. The powdered glass would have been immediately detectable in the wine and could not have caused the symptoms that had killed Sir Julian. Someone else had administered the strychnine that actually ended the archaeologist's life. But if Sister Helena is not the murderer, Inspector Mahmoud said slowly, then who? He let the question hang unfinished in the air, but I saw his eyes drift uncertainly around the room, as if seeing potential suspects in every shadow. The revelation that there had been two separate attempts on Sir Julian's life, one unsuccessful, one devastatingly effective, opened new and disturbing possibilities. Poirot rose from his chair and moved to the small window that looked out over the cloister garden. The scene was peaceful now, bathed in the soft light of evening, giving no hint of the violence that had so recently disturbed its tranquility. "We have here a most unusual situation," he said thoughtfully. "A planned murder that was not carried out, and an actual murder that was accomplished by different means entirely. Two separate acts of malice directed at the same victim, yet only one proved lethal." The weight of this realization settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Helena sat stunned and confused, her own confession having cleared her of the actual crime while revealing her guilty intentions. Mother Superior's face reflected a growing understanding that the true murderer remained hidden among her community, protected by the very sanctity that should have made such evil impossible. Inspector Mahmoud closed his notebook with obvious frustration, realizing that his case had just become infinitely more complex. Somewhere within the peaceful walls of St. Catherine's convent, beneath the facade of Christian charity and devotion, lurked a killer whose identity remained as hidden as the ancient secrets buried in the surrounding desert sands. Chapter 8. Justice and Absolution. The following. Morning brought with it the crisp clarity that often follows a night of revelation, though the atmosphere within St. Catherine's convent remained heavy with unresolved tension. Poirot had requested that all members of the community gather in the main hall, a rare occurrence that spoke to the gravity of the situation we faced. The hall itself was a magnificent chamber, its vaulted ceiling supported by columns that had witnessed centuries of monastic life. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the worn stone floors where generations of nuns had walked in contemplation and prayer. Today, however, the sacred space served a more worldly purpose, as Poirot prepared to unveil the truth behind Sir Julian's death. Inspector Mahmoud had positioned himself near the entrance, his hand resting nervously on his notebook, as if documentation alone might provide some protection against the complexities that had emerged. Mother Superior sat with quiet dignity in the front row, flanked by her senior sisters, while the younger nuns and novices occupied benches behind them. Helena, pale but composed, sat slightly apart, no longer quite a member of the community, yet not yet formally accused of any crime. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice carrying clearly through the vaulted space, "we gather this morning to address a tragedy that has shaken the very foundations of your peaceful sanctuary. The death of Sir Julian Markham was not a simple crime of passion, nor was it the straightforward act of revenge that it initially appeared to be." He moved to the center of the hall, his compact figure commanding attention through sheer force of personality. "We have learned that Sister Helena, driven by justified anger over her mother's abandonment and death, did indeed attempt to harm Sir Julian. Her method was primitive, but born of desperation. Powdered glass added to the communion wine during the Vesper service. A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled nuns. Several crossed themselves automatically, their faces reflecting horror at this violation of their most sacred ritual. Yet, as we discovered yesterday, Sister Helena's attempt failed before it could succeed. Powdered glass and wine would have been immediately detectable, and moreover, the symptoms of such poisoning are entirely different from those that actually claimed Sir Julian's life. Strychnine, not glass fragments, was the actual cause of death. Poirot paused, allowing this information to settle before continuing. This presents us with a remarkable situation. Two separate attempts on the same life, one unsuccessful and one devastatingly effective. The question that remained was, who administered the strychnine that actually killed Sir Julian? Inspector Mahmoud cleared his throat nervously. "Monsieur Poirot, surely the evidence still points to the Mother Superior, the public quarrel, the authority within the convent." "Ah, but you see, Inspector, that is precisely where our reasoning has been flawed," Poirot replied with a gentle shake of his head. "We have assumed that the poison was administered during the communion service, when in fact the timing of Sir Julian's death suggests something quite different." He moved toward the group of senior nuns, his keen eyes studying each face in turn. "Consider the sequence of events. Sir Julian partakes of communion at approximately 8 Cairo. He conducts business with Mother Superior and Sister Catherine until nearly 10 Mind, showing no symptoms of distress. Only when he ventures alone into the garden does the poison take effect. This timing is inconsistent with strychnine administered during Vespers." The logic was irrefutable, yet it raised the crucial question of when and how the deadly poison had been administered. Sister Catherine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and I noticed that her usually steady hands were trembling slightly. "The answer, Madame," Poirot continued, "lies in understanding the true nature of our murderer's opportunity. Sister Catherine, as the treasurer responsible for the convent's valuable artifacts, had legitimate access to materials that others did not. More significantly, she had observed Sister Helena's clumsy attempt through the sacristy window, an observation that provided her with perfect cover for her own, far more sophisticated plan. Now his attention focused directly on Sister Catherine, whose composure was rapidly crumbling under his steady gaze. "You saw everything, did you not, Sister Catherine? From your position in the sacristy completing your evening inventory, you witnessed Helena's tampering with the chalice. Rather than raise an alarm, you recognized an opportunity. The treasurer's face had gone ashen, but she maintained her silence with the stubbornness of desperation." Poirot continued inexorably. "Your plan was elegant in its simplicity. After completing the evening business meeting with Sir Julian and Mother Superior, you excused yourself to secure the chapel, a routine duty that no one would question. But instead of immediately returning to your quarters, you retrieved a special item from the treasury, a second silver chalice, identical to the first, part of a matching set donated to the convent decades ago. You prepared this second chalice with a lethal dose of strychnine, easily obtained from the supplies you maintained for pest control in the manuscript storage areas. The poison, dissolved in a small amount of wine, would be virtually undetectable in the ornate silver vessel. But how, Inspector Mahmoud interrupted, could she have gotten Sir Julian to drink from it? Poirot smiled grimly. That, Inspector, was perhaps the most clever aspect of her plan. Sir Julian had expressed particular admiration for the convent's Byzantine artifacts during his many visits. Sister Catherine approached him in the garden with the second chalice, claiming it was a newly discovered piece from the treasury that she wished to show him, a secret treasure not yet catalogued, requiring his expert authentication. The pieces fell into place with devastating precision. Sir Julian's scholarly vanity and his weakness for valuable antiquities made him the perfect victim for such an approach. Who could resist examining a potentially priceless artifact, especially when offered a taste of wine from such an ancient vessel to test its provenance? Sister Catherine finally broke her silence, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze that stirred through the hall. He destroyed so many lives, she whispered. Not just Fatima, but others. My own niece among them. She took service in his house 12 years ago, an innocent girl from Upper Egypt. When she became inconvenient to him, he dismissed her without references. Pregnant and disgraced, she died in childbirth, alone and abandoned, just as Fatima did. The confession continued in a rush of long-suppressed grief and anger. I came to this convent seeking peace after my family's tragedy, but when he arrived, as our benefactor, accepting our gratitude and praise, while I knew what he truly was, I could not bear it. When I saw Helena's pathetic attempt during the incense ceremony, I realized Providence had given me both the perfect opportunity and the perfect cover for justice. Yet justice was not yours to dispense, Mother Superior said quietly, her voice heavy with sorrow and disappointment. The living must answer for the dead, Sister Catherine replied with fierce conviction. God's justice works through mortal hands. When earthly courts failed to act, divine retribution must follow. The conclusion came with Sister Catherine's formal arrest, though Inspector Mahmoud seemed almost reluctant to disturb the profound sadness that had settled over the community. Helena, cleared of the actual murder but guilty of intent, faced a different kind of judgment, that of the religious community she had sought to deceive, and ultimately her own conscience. As we prepared to leave the convent, I reflected on the complex web of human emotion and divine justice that had played out within these ancient walls. Two women, both driven by legitimate grievances against the same callous man, had each sought their own form of retribution. One had failed through inexperience and inadequate means. The other had succeeded through calculation and superior access to deadly resources. Poirot walked beside me in thoughtful silence as we made our way through the narrow streets back to our pension. The morning sun painted the ancient stones in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance, the bells of Cairo's many churches began their call to prayer. In this city, where civilizations had risen and fallen for millennia, one more small tragedy had been resolved, though its moral complexities would linger long in memory. The silver chalices of St. Catherine's Convent would be purified and returned to their sacred purpose. But the stain of their misuse would remain as a reminder that even within the most hallowed spaces, human nature retains its capacity for both profound evil and desperate justice. The case was closed, yet its lessons about the price of abandonment, the weight of responsibility, and the dangerous allure of personal vengeance would echo through the corridors of that ancient sanctuary for years to come. Thank you for joining me for A Killing in Cairo. Did you suspect Sister Catherine before Poirot revealed the truth about the two chalices, or were you convinced Helena was our murderer? Tell us in the comments if you enjoyed this mystery from the ancient streets of Cairo. Please like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. Keep those little gray cells working. And remember, in the world of Poirot, things are rarely as simple as they first appear. Until next time, this is Ailey, signing off from Cafe Tales.